depending on who you are, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is either going to be a gigantic box office success or an unbelievable disappointment. The box office predictions are all over the place, but one thing's for sure, this film is going to have an uphill battle. And what's up, Fate family? I'm Jarvis Guy with Voyager YT. I hope you can forgive the slightly different intro today, but I think that was important to state because, going into this discussion of Indiana Jones and Dial of Destiny's box office performance, I need to make it clear that I don't really have a dog in this fight. I don't really care if this film succeeds or fails, but honestly, with the film's gargantuan $295 million budget and all the drama and reshoots that have been surrounding the film and all the negative reception, this is going to be fascinating to track. And I'm a big fan of the box office. I love tracking these films, and I thought, hey, you know what? What better way to really flex my analytical skills than going over, the potential performance of this film and along with my own personal predictions. So without further ado, let's just jump into this analysis of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny's potential box office earnings. Well, all right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. I have a whole document set up with these predictions, and we're going to go over each one of them one by one, or as is reasonable. So up first here, we're going to talk about the domestic predictions, because that's really what everything in this analysis is based on, the domestic predictions. And here we have three historical multipliers that may reflect the actual gross of the film. So first off, we have a potential multiplier of 3.17 times. Which is the same as Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which opened at 100 billion and finished with 317 million. We have a domestic gross, if Indy 5 ends up doing this, of 190 to 237 million, which is based on an opening weekend of 60 to 75 million. Now, honestly, if the film ended up in this range, it'd be pretty abysmal. I think anything below $300 million would be deeply concerning for the Walt Disney Company, and that would represent a massive lost opportunity cost. So they really wouldn't want to end up with a 3.17 multiplier. Now, I think the Hollywood projections for Indy 5 have been adjusted up. The trades have been given some better numbers lately, but not by much, maybe like 10 million. So honestly, 190 to 237 million, that's still a real possibility, and I wouldn't keep it in this video if there was no chance of it happening. All right, up next for the next multiplier, we've got 5.16x, which is a median, or I guess it's actually mean, of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and Temple of Doom's domestic legs. And that gives us a domestic gross of 341 to 426 million. Now, that would be very good. That would actually be really good. Like I said, anything above 300 million would be a win for Indy 5, but it's going to have a very difficult time reaching this number because the reception that's coming out isn't that good. People are saying that the first 20 minutes are the best part of the movie, which is not good. That's not enough to get butts and seats, and the film is like 2.5 hours long. And nowadays, that's really a runtime that you have to earn because people are getting sick and tired of it. I think Guardians 3 is the only one that's been able to pull it off because, it's like an adventure that you don't want to end. But I think with Indy 5, you're going to have like news reports of people in theaters begging to be let out or just like running out as soon as they can because they just want the movie to be over with. Yeah, and then lastly, we have 7.16x, which was Temple of Doom's multiplier. Now, I picked this multiplier for a very specific reason. Temple of Doom, when you compare it to the other classic Indiana Jones films like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Last Crusade, this didn't have the best multiplier when you compare it to those other films. So that's why I chose it, because Indy 5, honestly, the best it can hope for is 5x legs, but 7x legs, they are a possibility even if they're absolutely remote at this point. But the 7.16x legs would give it 429 to 537 million dollars in its domestic gross, which would be fantastic, and that's honestly probably what Disney wants. And it's really, honestly, with how much they spent on this film, that's really how much they should be making. Because my personal rule of thumb is if you aren't making back your production budget through your domestic gross, then you're failing. But I think for a film like this would need to go above $300 million to be seen as anything more than a Pyrrhic victory. But anyway, moving on to the international and worldwide predictions. Now, the way I calculated this was by looking at the classic indie films' international grosses and then finding out what percentage of the film's worldwide gross came from overseas. So that's how I calculated this. So right here, where it says 38% int from Raiders, that means that 38% of Raiders' worldwide gross was from the international gross. I really hope you guys are keeping up, but that's the only way I was able to come up with these numbers. But anyway, if Indiana Jones 5's worldwide gross, 38% of it comes from overseas, that would give it an international gross of 126 to 329 million. And honestly, either one of those numbers would be so pathetic that it's not even worth thinking about. I don't even know if this is actually possible, but those are just what the numbers gave me based on the domestic gross calculations we just looked at. So it's unlikely that the film is going to be this domestic heavy, but when you look at the worldwide gross that these international numbers would give, it would be absolutely disastrous. It's not even worth thinking about, because 306 to 866 million, the higher end of that range looks good, but with how big the budget is, the film could still be losing money. And even if it did manage to turn a profit with this horrible end percentage, it'd have to have a very high domestic percentage of the gross, which isn't going to happen. I think to get to 866, it need to make like 537 million. But yeah, to get to this number, it probably wouldn't even be making that large of a profit, which is not good. And again, that represents another massive lost opportunity cost. Now, looking at this 46% international gross here, which is representative of Temple of Doom, and we're basing all this on the previous Indiana Jones films, you have a potential international gross of 161 to 452 million, and a worldwide gross of 351 to 994 million. Now, this is where we start getting into decent territory, because I think an international gross of 452 million would be pretty good. 994 million, I mean, that wouldn't be hitting $1 billion, and I think Disney would do whatever they can to get it to the $1 billion mark. But this would be honestly a pretty respectable result. They wouldn't be making a very large profit. I think that they still be able to consider the film a success at that point. But the issue here is you have these low end numbers. These low end numbers are what you're gonna end up near if the film's domestic gross is still bad. That's what these percentages are all based on. They're based on the film's domestic gross. So if these numbers are bad, then clearly it didn't do that well in the U.S. So while 46% int would be good, it's still pretty risky. And that high end range is still not at $1 billion, which, I mean, I'm sure they'll get to that point, but that'd be an artificial victory, I mean, that's better compared to the, honestly, Pyrrhic victories they get with a 38% international percentage. But even then, with 46% international, these honestly aren't the results that they want, because at best, they'd be making like 100 million profit, and that's not great. All right, moving on to 58% international, which is derived from The Last Crusade, all the way back in, I think, 1989. Not sure when that film came out. You have an international gross of 262 to 741 million, which is not bad. That would honestly be really good, at least on the lower end. I mean, this 262 number, that's still pretty disastrous, but it is at least 100 million above the other one. So honestly, the numbers start looking a lot better here, and with the high end worldwide gross of 1.2 billion, that'd honestly be fantastic. That'd be a profit of maybe over 300 million, which, I mean, that depends on if the break even is at 737 or 811 million. But either way, 1.2 billion, that would look really good on paper, even if it somehow didn't end up netting them a lot of money. So honestly, these are the numbers to strive for, but these low ends, they're still pretty rough. They're still pretty rough. All right, and lastly, at 60% int, which represents Crystal Skull, we have potential international grosses of 285 to 805 million, and potential worldwide grosses of 475 to 1.342 billion. Now, again, these are very good numbers, basically the same as the last one. A gross of 1.3 billion would look very good on paper, and that wouldn't represent much of an opportunity cost, although the film would have to perform exceptionally both international and domestically. So I don't think that's incredibly likely, but there's still an outside chance of it happening. All right, so when you look at the final results here, you have a maximum loss for the film of 444 to 594 million, and a maximum profit of 442 to 592 million. So these two numbers are very similar in terms of pure nominal value, but they are worlds apart in what they would mean for Disney and Lucasfilm. Because honestly, if they ended up with a loss on the low end of this 444 million, they would need to be shitting themselves, because heads will start rolling at the studio. Heads will absolutely start rolling. And I don't think Indy 5 is going to finish below 500 million, which I think would be necessary for a maximum loss this low. But with these numbers coming in, at least on the domestic side of like an opening of 70 to 60 million, that's horrible, man. That's horrible. And that's how you end up with numbers near this, when really you should be ending up with a profit that looks more like this. That's what Disney wants. That's why they spend so much money on this, aside from all the constant reshoots, which I don't even think is factored into the 295 million production budget figure. But hey, we're not going to talk about that right now. Anyway, the average mean of the worldwide grosses that we talked about up here, that's at $757 million. So from what I remember when I originally typed this, that would represent either a maximum profit of $20 million or a maximum loss of about $70 to $100 million. So $757 million. That would not be good for this film, especially with a $295 million budget. I think Disney could somehow find a way to spin anything above $700 million into a success. I mean, one, that'd be very difficult, and two, in the end, they wouldn't be gaining a whole lot of money from this, and there'd still be a massive lost opportunity cost. So there you go. And lastly, let's take a look at my prediction. I think that in the end, based on what I gleaned from this analysis, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny will have an opening weekend in the U.S. of $85 million, which I think that's a bit above what the industry projections are right now as of June 25th, 2023. I think the film is honestly going to surprise people in terms of its opening weekend. I think that they'll be able to get out to that audience, but really the opening weekend numbers should be either in the high 90s or in 100 million, at least with what Disney is expecting. So the fact that I'm somewhat bullish on the film's opening, and I don't even think it'll get past 85 million, that should tell you a lot. I think maybe a couple of months ago, before I knew about all the shit that was wrong with this film, before I knew like all the reviews coming out, I would have said this film is easily doing over 100 million, which it would need to do. Now, I can't even see a 9 in front of it, which would still be really bad. So I'm over predicting it compared to a lot of people, but the number I'm predicting still isn't good. All right, and looking at the domestic gross right here, you have 255 million for its final total, which will be 3x legs, and I'm sure the actual number will vary, but let's just say it's around 3x legs. And 255 million, that would be absolutely embarrassing for a couple of reasons. I mean, first off, the budget is 295 million, and like I said earlier in the video, if you can't make back your production budget in the US, then the film wasn't really worth making, and I can't see this crossing 300 million. I mean, when you do the math on it, if you take the 85 million opening, then to make it to 300 mil domestically, you would need legs of 3.5x, which I really don't see happening unless the general audience just I don't know, I guess has like a mental episode, and then just decides that, hey, you know what, I love Hollywood crap now, even though that they've been showing us all throughout this month that they're unwilling to see the garbage that Hollywood is feeding them, like we saw with Transformers Rise of the Beast, like we saw with The Flash, like we saw with Elemental. People are just sick and tired of the crap that Hollywood is giving them. So I just don't see a way that this makes it to 3.5x legs. I'm sorry, I just don't. And when you look at my international prediction, it gets a little bit wonkier there. I predicted $350 to $450 million, which is a gap of $100 million, which is pretty substantial. But I'm honestly not sure how this film will perform overseas. I mean, it could be way below the $350 million figure that I put on the low end, but when all said and done, I don't think that it's going to go much higher than the 450 million figure that I have right here. I honestly don't think that's happening. And the range I predicted would be either 57 to 63% of the gross, assuming that the final total is at 255 million, which is looking pretty likely at this point. And that would give us a final worldwide total of 605 to 705 million, and a total loss of 33 to 206 $1 million depending on if the break-even point is at 737 or $811 million. It depends on how you want to do the multiplier on that. Now, people may calculate the break-even point differently. Like I know some people, they use like a percentage of a film's domestic, international, and China gross, but I really don't do that. I don't think those results are reliable or realistic. I just use the multipliers, and even with the multiplier, which is usually more forgiving towards films, it still ends up with a loss, and that's honestly abysmal. You know, Disney, they must have been expecting a profit of above $200 million, because you don't just give a film a 295, probably over 300 at this point, $1 million production budget, and then just allow it to lose this much money. But like I said before, I'm sure that if the film somehow manages to scrape its way over 700 million, they'll be able to spin it as a success. But if it's anything below 700 million, they're going to have a very difficult time trying to paint this as anything else besides a gargantuan flop. And I think Lucasfilm strategy is honestly going to have to change, and they're going to have to start questioning their long-term survival. If the numbers really are as bad as I'm predicting, and I've gone through a lot of work to predict all this, then that'd be abysmal. Because you can't kick off like a new sequel trilogy, a new series of films with Indiana Jones' goddaughter and a new TV show. You can't do that with a loss of 33 to 206 million. That's not even possible. That's not even economically feasible. And although I know Disney, they aren't really known for their great financial decisions lately, they'd be stupid to go ahead with this. They'd have no good reason to go ahead with this. But yeah, with that, those are my predictions for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. It's looking a lot more like a Dial of Doom right now. This film is not going to do very well. And a lot of people, have been predicting this for a long time online, but honestly, I just felt the need to put it in the raw numbers, because this is going to be a disaster like we've never seen before. And honestly, I don't care if it succeeds or fails, but I can see the signs, and the signs are not looking good for this film. But either way, with that said, I've been Jarvis Guy, the Void Jarvis YT. I really hope you learned something from this analysis, editorial, whatever you want to call it. I'm having a lot of fun making these. I think I did a Secret Invasion, and what else was it? Star Trek Prodigy one. I recorded a No Way Home one, but I'm not sure if that's out right now. That was a lot of fun to do, just to revisit that film again. So yeah, again, I hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something, and I will see you guys in the next one.